I just, it's just really nice to have so many people sign up for this, and I think it'll be very helpful and informative. Hans has got himself and another person who's very, very experienced with blades, sharpening blades. And so I think this is going to be a great talk. I can't wait to hear it. And I'll let you know, Dan, if I've got any questions. I've got a list here for the people submitted earlier, so
okay,
I might chirp in. So I would say, Hans, listen, it's really welcome. We're great to have you here. And why don't you tell us who you're with, and we can just start from there.
Okay, so this is Todd Schaefer. He was formerly working for Ice Master, and actually lives just a little bit down the road from me here. Doesn't have to drive an hour and 15 minutes to Winnipeg anymore, and has a nice close drive to Minerva Tree Farms now, of course, called Eye on the Blade. We also obviously have a company called Eye on the Ice, which is my ice monitoring system I invented a few years back. And so we made a sister company called Eye on the Blade, and Todd is very professional in doing these blades, and probably been one of the best guys in the world sharpening blades over the past 20 years. Can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. It was just great to have you here, Todd. So
great.
All right. So why don't we just start? And I guess the first place maybe we can start is just around caring for blades. Why don't we start with how people should be caring for their blades in terms of just as they get them, as they handle them, and then anything else about, I guess, the blades, including the bar and making sure that the blades stay attached to the bar. So just, I would start right there.
Okay, so, I mean, obviously I've been an ice maker for 40 some years, and when you scrape with a blade, the most important thing is when you're done with it, you wipe it dry with a rag and don't cut yourself, and spray it immediately with a silicone spray or WD-40 so that the blade can never rust. A lot of curling clubs gone through over the years, you get into a curling club and the guy scrapes with a blade that's completely full of rust. And if you have rust on a blade, you will not be able to hone that blade. As soon as you get any little rust spots, whatever you're going to be using to sharpen it with is going to ride up and will not give you a true finish anymore when you sharpen a blade.
Yeah, especially on both sides of the knife for cleaning and spraying, not just the top.
Yeah, not just the top and bottom.
And so that's for like day-to-day use. What do you do if you're going to be storing the blade over the summer? How should people handle the blades? You take them off the machine. Should they spray them with WD-40, make sure they're clean?
Yeah, it's the exact same procedure. The exact same procedure. You dry your blade off top and bottom and spray the blade, and you put it away. There is absolutely no reason, for it to rust if it's not in a basement where the humidity is 100%. And if you spray it, it shouldn't rust anyway. So.
Okay. And is it okay to store them like on a concrete floor? Like, so if you put the blade guard on them and just attach the blade guard and then leave them on a concrete floor that maybe isn't perfectly level, whatever, for over the summer, is that any problems? Is there anything else people need to keep in mind about where they set these blades, especially in the off season when they're not using them?
Well, as long as you put your wooden protective board on the blade, you store your blade anywhere. Okay. It doesn't matter if it's a level concrete floor or a wooden floor, or you can put it in your kitchen if you like, as long as it's dry and sprayed. If your wooden board is on that blade, and we now provide a little rubber
chip protector.
Chip protector. Even we just found a really a really good place down in the US to get these rubber chip protectors for our blades. So every one of our blades that's going to get sharpened is going to have this chip protector on the front of the blade as well. We've had some people drop their blades and they actually damaged the blades. They came back looking like a hacksaw blade, and this won't happen anymore with this chip protecting rubber that we have.
And so this is just like a piece of rubber that slides over the front edge of the blade? Is it a...
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
All right. All right. So, okay, that helps in terms of off-season. Kevin Polly just asked a question about how do you treat the blade as stored on the ice between scrapes? And I guess that would be a question for how long? Again,
if you're scraping and you're going from one sheet to the other, then you just make sure your blade stays cold all the time. So a lot of people, when they first get into the ice making industry, they don't realize that, especially in an arena setting, a curling club's not that bad. But if you make ice in an arena setting where you have lots of light and heat, if you leave that blade up for any amount of time, like even just for a few minutes, it'll get warm. And when you set it down, it will melt into the ice. So if you, as an ice maker, like have a 5-sheet curling rink, let's just say, or a 6-sheet curling rink, you scrape one sheet and you want to clean it up before you go to the next one. You just take that scraper, sweep it off, take it to the next sheet and put it on the ice. And, you know, make sure that it's on the ice, not above the ice, so that it stays cold. And that's about it until you finish scraping all your sheets. And then you just go to the process of drying it and spraying it with oil.
Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about sharpening. Okay, so it's important to get a quality sharpening. And like I said a few minutes ago, I became aware of a company that was sharpening blades down here in the States, and they were moving the blade from the bar. And it seems like that's considered a no-no. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. What's the importance of the blade remaining attached to the bar?
Todd, do you want to take that?
They are basically mated units with decked surfaces, and they will not be from original blanks to the first grinds put into them. They're not absolute true. So by taking them apart, because it's, even if you adjust your torque by 1 pound, you're definitely going to have differences invoked into what are the parameters. So all you can do is never take it apart unless you're having a brand spanking new blade blank put on, ever.
And so the reason what gets done to these blades, just to go a little further, when a blade is new, the tube gets zeroed out and the blade gets zeroed out, and then they get torqued together, and that's the way they stay. If you don't do that, every time you took a blade, if you took a blade off and sharpen it, the blade might pull or move from the sharpening, and when you put it back, it will not be the same.
Okay. And so you really, if you're using somebody who's taking the bar and the blade and separating them, then the chances are that you could end up with a blade that really isn't as accurate as it needs to be to do what we're asking it to do.
Absolutely.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So
there's been a lot of people that have been in the business that you know, that have done that, and what they do is they use brass shims, and they try to shim the blade straight.
Yeah, it's an induced straight.
Yeah, like so, you know, they're losing the bolts off between the tube and the blade, and then they put it on a straight edge and they shim it to be straight. And that's fine if you do that in a room like we are here right now, where it's 20 Celsius, you know, or 70 Fahrenheit. But when you take that blade and you take it into a curling rink, where some of the curling rinks, you know, might be 3-4 Celsius, you know, inside air temperature, or some of them even colder, then those blades will move. They will not be the same.
And with blades that are on their bar, are there any chances that they will start to move or warp or do anything like that by temperature changes or things like that? I mean,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. You never use a blade until it reaches a temperature, a stable temperature. And that's why it needs to be on the ice. If you use it while it's still either warming up or chilling, it is in movement at that time.
So
And
the
then-
reason you had asked me about, pulling blades and stuff like that. So I could give you an example that if, let's just say we're doing a world championship or something like that. And let's say we hit a little piece of rock or something, a pebble, an official or somebody tracked a piece of pebble on the ice and we hit it and we chipped the blade. Now we have another blade and we're in a hurry. We have to go put another blade on and then go scraping. And that blade is sitting on ice somewhere, but that's fine, but it hasn't been on the ice that we're scraping. So you have to let that blade sit for a while and cool it down, throw a couple of pieces of plastic or a couple of paint sticks underneath and let it cool down. And even then, it will have to be pulled up. The corners will want to be pulled up because they'll always warp down when they're hot.
Okay. So basically that's sort of what I was trained with. We would store ours in the compressor room. When we knew we were going to be using them, we'd bring them out 3 or 4 days before and let them sit in the ice shed somewhere over the ice, but in the ice shed to let them kind of acclimatize to that temperature versus what it was in the compressor room. So that's basically what we were kind of told, or I was told to sort of follow as a process. So
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about just what you do when a blade comes in to be sharpened, how you handle it, just what that process is as you sharpen the blades?
Mostly is come in and first thing we'll do is visible inspection for any damage, rust, pitting, whichever. At that point, then it's ready to be put into the grinder at that. Then you would use an indicator dial and work out what is the parameters that the blade is coming in at, and does it meet parameters for either a top grind, or does it have to be restructured for both sides of the knife?
So maybe you might want to explain what a top grind and the back grind is.
A top grind is strictly on the larger cut, not the bottom side. And that would be a just straight up sharpening. Once you have to start doing what is I call a full grind, and you're doing both sides of the knife, is you're restructuring the whole blade from either a damage or it does not meet parameters to be able to produce a blade that would be worthwhile.
And what would cause a blade to come in that needed to be both getting a full grind? Could that be a nick, or what are some of the things that?
It all depends on like a nick or a chip in the blade. I can go deeper than that, which has been fires, floods, electrical cords, running it into rocks, hacks, end boards, sideboards, falling off of trucks.
Okay. All right. Okay.
It's immense.
It's a whole range of possibilities there.
Absolutely.
Okay. And is rust one of them?
Oh, yes.
Rust is bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
It seems more predominant usually at the early part of the season.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing also a bottom grind, if that's the right term, so generally the blades have felt to me like totally, or at least the ones we had, it seemed to me they were totally flat on the bottom all the way. And the only place there was a taper was on the top. There was a hollow grind on the top.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens when you do a bottom grind? Is that going to change that? It won't feel or look completely flat, or is my idea wrong?
The main idea behind a bottom grind on them is when you have brand spanking new blanks, the average for the industry supplying blanks to us is probably plus minus 10 thou. So at that point, we have to take a very shallow cut on the bottom to true that side up.
Okay.
And we try and maintain like less than, I'm going to say, brand new blades would be under 1 degree. So it's really a shallow cut. But as the blades age and or damage occurs, you can only allow the grind on the bottom get so wide before it can start affecting what it wants to dive. So you're eventually, through time and age of the blade, you'll be slowly and incrementally increasing the bottom angle, but to a very small degree.
Okay. So I'd worked in a wood shop for a while, and the science there was that with your fingers, you can't feel anything more sensitive than like 1,000 of a degree or of inch or something like that. So, but it seems like you're talking about 10,000, right?
Yeah. Actually,
that's pretty fine.
Visibly and by touch, the average is that we really cannot see or feel at about the 10 thou level.
Okay.
That's where it's super important that we use the indicator dials that are calibrated to be able to know what numbers we're reading.
And then what are the instances where you might contact the club to say, hey, these are the questions that I've got about your blade when it comes in? So it might be at the assessment point or...
Oh, absolutely. It's usually through the assessment. And then if it has enough meat, as they say, to be able to get into the grinder, there's certain parameters that would say this cannot be sharpened. And that comes between the inspection and the pre-dial-in.
Okay. So 2 questions about blades. So should all curling blades be hollow ground?
Automatically, anybody that does grinding on the blades, you have plus minus X amount of hollow built in. The wider the cut, the more hollow you would have in it. The smaller cuts would have way less in it. But no matter what, any kind of surface grinding always has hollow.
Okay, so that's just part of the grinding process.
You bet.
Part of the grinding process, and you know, if you want to resharpen a blade, you know, I could draw a picture. If you know, if this was my hollow, I don't know if you can see it, but if this is your hollow grind right here, when you resharpen that blade, it's only going to touch here and touch here. If you had to have this hollow ground, yeah, you would be you'd be going back and forth with that honing stone for 10 years before you'd make a difference. With the hollow ground, you're only going to touch the little tip right here.
So let's set that aside and bring that back in a minute. Okay. So let me ask you a couple other questions. Another question about the blades. So the blades we had basically were sold that said they had an inlay, which seemed to be an inlay right on the front edge of the blade, on the bottom, harder steel. So are inlays pretty common amongst people that manufacture blades? Is that the norm?
Pretty much it would be the industry standard that they would have inlay into the blades on the bottom side. Can be variable thickness, can also be, depending on who is the supplier, be variable composition also.
Okay.
That's quite important because, you know, I think most of the guys that I know that buy these blades, they come from either Germany or Italy or somewhere in Europe, yeah, because they're the best blades made. And once your blade gets really short, when the guy has used his blade, then it's basically too small to sharpen. Then, you know, there's not enough sticking out from the tube. That means that your hardening of the blade is gone and the blades won't stay sharp for very long. They wear out really fast. Because once you get through that process, you know, that's been hardened on the front, then you lose your perfectness of the blade. Like that will last for a long time.
Okay. So if you notice you're getting your blades seems to be getting dull quite a bit, then beyond the fact that maybe it just needs to go for sharpening, it could be as a result of that you're getting past the inlay point. So you're losing that hard steel that doesn't retain, that really retains an edge much better than the soft steel.
That's correct.
So let me ask about just two other things about the blades around in that bar. So let's talk a little bit about what's the purpose of the weights?
Well, so if you wouldn't have weights, you would not have enough down pressure on your blade. Like you have X amount of pounds pressing against your ice. And if you wouldn't have those weights and the down pressure, like if you were trying to scrape a little bit aggressively, your blade would just chatter. It would be like a washboard. It would just be going bang, 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 like this down the ice. And you need that down pressure weight for that not to happen. That's also the reason why when you scrape, that you change your angles all the time. You go either right angle, left angle, or straight, always different, so that your blade cannot start chattering if it starts to get dull.
Okay. And then what about the tensioner? So what's the purpose of the tensioner?
Well, the tensioner keeps your blade straight. So, you know, years ago, people always had runs in the ice. Like, and I remember way back when I did some of my first world championships back in, for instance, '92 in Geneva, and they didn't know that you could have, you know, tensioners on your blades. And when I did some of those first events back in, I remember Garmisch-Partenkirchen and Geneva and all those places in Europe that didn't have those things, and they'd have runs in the ice all the time because the blades would warp from the heat in big arenas, and they would always go down on the outsides. And you need to have that tightener to keep the blade straight
and stable,
yeah, so that it doesn't go up and down like a banana.
So let's talk about new blades, or a new blade that's just been sharpened. You bring it to the club, put it on, cool it down, put it on, and then how should we go about testing that blade? Do we test it with weights in it?
Absolutely, you do. Yeah.
Okay.
You put your weights in it, and if your ice is good, you test that blade going up and down the ice first, and if it shows something, you test it sideways on the ice. If you don't have flood lines in your ice, if you go sideways, it will tell you 100% the truth whether that blade is straight or not. And what I always do is I go one way, then I turn around the exact opposite way. And if that blade scrapes more than on one side than the other, then you'll know 100% for sure if it's the blade or the ice.
Can you describe a flood line for those people that may not know what that is?
So when you flood your ice and you go back and forth, if your ice is too cold when you flood it, you will have it, the ice will freeze so fast that your ice will never actually be level. So when you scrape, if you scrape and pebble and you don't get those flood lines out, then basically you got like the Swiss mountains. You got a wave going down your ice. If you have that and you test your blade sideways, then it will not tell you the truth if that blade is good or not.
Okay. So after you've kind of tested it, is the only time you're going to put a tensioner on is if you think that those outside edges of the blade are cutting more than they should?
No, as soon as you put a new blade on,
yeah,
first thing you do is put that tensioner on the same time.
Yeah.
And
okay,
then you set that blade by that tensioner. Like if you're going to be half of a good ice maker, within 5 minutes, you'll know where that tensioner has to be set. Like you just go ahead. If it starts scraping more on the outside, you pull it up. If it's not, doesn't scrape enough, you let it down a bit, and it has to be so that all you have on that blade is the last inch of that blade should be tapering off a little bit, and the rest should be 100% straight. If that's not happening, you need to adjust that tensioner.
So the last inch should be tapering off, slightly going down. Is that what you're saying? Or
The
okay,
snow should build up less. Yeah, it should
There.
be tapering down on each outside.
and so the tensioner should be on the blade pretty much all the time.
All the time. All the time.
Okay. That wasn't the experience I had where I was, but that's just the way things are. But
Yep.
that's the reason we do these things.
Yeah.
And so basically part of this testing of new blade is basically with the tensioner on and the weights in, all right? And from there, you're going to be making adjustments to determine whether this blade seems to have any problem or not.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So a couple other things that I'll ask about. Let's see. Somebody asked about, so let's talk about honing. So why don't we pull your little diagram out? And so okay, so, no, that works fine. I mean, I want to tell you, I was looking at something this afternoon that was very similar, but okay, that works fine. So why don't we talk about honing? So people want to know about what's the frequency that they should hone. I think it's helpful to chat a little bit about how they should hone. And then we can kind of go from there.
So now with the honing, you know, there's maybe a few different ways if you can hone a blade. Now, personally, I have what you call a soapstone, like a really fine soapstone. Todd can explain some of the different stones that we use here to finish blades. He can do that after, but I prefer sandpaper to do my blades. It gives me a comfortable feeling, and I use wet and dry automotive sandpaper that goes from 1,000 grit to a 400 grit. And depending on what I want to do with this blade, if I just take off a little burr and after the blade was new, or if I'm actually resharpening this blade, that depends what kind of grit of paper I'm going to use. And if I have an area that's maybe a little too sharp or a little too dull, then I like to use my little soapstone to just sharpen that area. But you can also do that with the sandpaper. So a lot of us ice maker guys like to use sandpaper with a stone underneath, and others just like to use honing stones. And it's a safer way to use sandpaper than it is a honing stone. If you're not good at it, you can really ruin a blade really quick.
Yeah.
With sandpaper, it's a safer way. But I'll let Todd talk about some of the different stones that we use to finish blades.
Are you ready?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
Okay, it's I've dealt with basically, I'm going to say about 4 different types of honing stones, ranging in what would be about, I'm going to say somewhere around the 300 grit all the way up to what is, he calls it a soapstone, but mine is natural Arkansas. It's the surgical black. It's a very, very hard Arkansas stone. You can resurface it, but I would use a little bit of sandpaper to keep a flat surface on it. I would only use the medium and a fine, what would be into aluminum oxide. I usually have to resurface those all the time because I don't like using them. As they wear, you can create grooves into them, little check marks, and that can affect your performance in honing.
So if you're using sandpaper, you need to be using some sort of stone underneath it.
Yes,
Honing stone underneath, yeah. Wrap it in whatever paper you're using so that you've got that uniform surface, right? And it should be a stone that's relatively new, right? Or not worn.
That's right.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
I can go grab one and just hold it up if anybody wants to see what I use underneath.
Oh,
yeah,
good.
He's going to go and get the piece of sandpaper and the stone that we use underneath to hone blades with. And that gives everybody a pretty good idea like how that works. So,
and so you found in your experience that you think that sandpaper maybe isn't as risky to use as a stone. That it gives you a little bit room for error.
Yeah, less room for error. Yes. So if somebody is getting into the ice making, especially, like I've done it for 40 years, so I can use anything. But the thing is, like sharpening blades, it's an art. It's like making ice. You know, honestly, sometimes over the years, I've tried to teach people how to make ice, and some of them just aren't meant to be ice makers, and others are meant to be ice makers like right away. But anyway, so we would be using a stone like this one here, and you could buy it in any hardware store. And it's got, you know, it's got a rougher side on one side and a little finer on the other side. And this is about 6 inches long, about 2 inches wide, and about 1/2 inch thick. And then all we do is take a piece of paper like this, and we cut it so that you just, oh, I'm just going to rip it so that.
Yeah, because you only want a single.
Yeah, I'm just going to rip it so that I can show you. Wait a minute, there must be some scissors here. Yeah, some scissors. Let's see if she has some scissors here. Okay, anyway, that'll do. Yeah. So what you would do is you would just grab that piece of paper like this, put it on like that. Now it's on that block, and then you go back and forth like this on your blade, and you have a fairly wide surface, which then doesn't make you slip off the blade either. I usually go a little bit on an angle back and forth, and that way you're very safe. You're a lot safer than having a wee little Arkansas stone, or, you know, like a soapstone, and it saves your fingers, and it's good.
It's fast and easy.
It's fast and easy, yeah.
And let me just go back to make sure that I understand you correctly. So is it really okay for some people who, let's say, were not that experienced, to actually using the sandpaper versus a stone?
Better to use sandpaper than a stone if they're not that experienced.
Okay.
It's the amount of pressure you don't put into it. You allow the paper to do the work, not the pressure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe pull your little diagram up there again.
Okay.
I want to tell you, it works. It's good. So now you're talking about running that. Okay. The stone is going to go across that area. It's only going to touch the top and the bottom. Right?
Yeah.
Touch here and touch.
Yeah. And that's it.
Right. And we're talking about going across the whole stone, one swipe, and then back.
Yeah.
Back and forth, a few swipes.
Yeah. And sometimes it only takes one time. Just when I sharpen a blade, if I go one time, I can take 6 or 7 turns off, or else that thing will, if you use, say, 400 grit, that's fairly aggressive. If you sharpen that, and if you went even just one time, that thing would just dig in right away if you don't back off like a bunch of turns. That's how good that works.
So when I was doing woodworking, okay, we'd sharpen chisels and we'd sharpen planer blades and things like that. And usually with chisels, it was pretty common, not unusual after using them for a little while, that you'd start to get a burr on the top.
Yep.
And you could feel it. Okay. You could just feel it. And is the same true for a scraper blade?
Absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
And would we wait to feel that burr before we hone, or would we be just honing on some regular basis?
So go ahead, Todd.
Your finger is going to tell you that story.
Okay.
And always you feel away to the point, never through the point. You always feel, and you want to roll your finger over the top to feel if there's, in my world, it's called a catch. You'll feel if there's any curl in the point coming up over top.
Will you ever feel anything on the bottom?
Very little.
Very little, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
More likely you're going to feel it on the top.
Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're cutting with a blade, it's this motion.
Yeah.
And it's going to pull to the top side of the blade.
Okay.
And if you don't stay on top of that, this is what you're going to want to do to keep the same cut going.
Gotcha. And should people be keeping a log about when they hone? I mean, generally people try to keep a log about what they do for scraping patterns, or log about pebbling, different things, but should that be part of what they keep as a log or keep track of? A lot of our clubs have different people doing the ice different days of the week. And
if you have multiples, absolutely.
If you have multiples, if it's one ice maker, if your blade gets dull, you'll know right away. You'll know immediately. But if you have several different guys, and if they're not used to working with ice, then I could see that, you know, it might be good to, if a guy comes in Tuesday and the next guy comes in Thursday, maybe it said, well, you know, put a note, I hone the blade on Tuesday, so you don't have to hone it on Thursday, right?
Okay. Yep. No, that's helpful. It's just, you can't end up with situations where you have multiple people, and if people don't leave notes, nobody knows what was done the day before or the day after, and you know, you could be honing forever. Somebody had a question about a flex beam, and are the procedures any different for those than regular beams?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the honest to God truth.
Okay.
I've only ever once in my entire life, there was a bunch of us higher level ice technicians that do world championships and Briars and stuff. We tried a flex beam, and we never ever used one. We could not get it to do what we wanted to do, and that's basically where it was left at. I can't say anything good or anything bad about it, but we could never make it work for us.
Okay, so there was a guy in the club I was in that I didn't ever witness this, but heard, so that when he would hone the blade, he would take the stone and hold it right up against the front of the blade and run it right against the front of the blade along the edge. All right. Mm-hmm. And I'd never heard of that as something that people talked about using in woodworking as a way to start to sharpen a blade. You either sharpen the top edge or the bottom edge or both. Okay. But I never heard about somebody running kind of a stone, sort of like what you had, have it upright and run it right along the edge of the blade the whole way.
So the reason why that would be, and that's the only reason I can think, but Todd can, if some of the manufacturers, and I'm not going to mention names, but there are some that the way they grind blades, they're so sharp that you cannot start to scrape with them. They will dig in. Either they don't cut, and then you give it that extra half a turn and it wants to go, thank you very much, down to China. So what I've had for instance like that is a piece of plastic that I'd ran directly right in front on the very front all the way along. Yeah. Or some people just took a honing stone and just went right along the front, and that's probably where you heard that from, or that's probably how that came about.
Okay. All right. I could see that. All right. That makes sense. I hadn't heard that before, but I mean, and I understand what you're saying about it's almost like too sharp an edge to be able to really cut the way you want to cut it.
Exactly what it is. Yeah. Okay. It is really, really hard when you have a blade that is so sharp that you can't start scraping with it. That is just the worst. And especially if you do an event or you're on arena ice and you're under a time constraint, or your blade wants to dig in, and then, you know, you have a big digging and it has to be played on within 24 hours and you're screwed. Like it's a bad situation.
And is that just, are there other signs of it being too sharp, that's what you've got, that the club guy's got a blade where it's just either digging in or kind of not cutting? Is that what it would be doing? It's either you can't get it to get to some regular cut?
Yes,
that's right.
So it almost be you're struggling with all your adjustments. You'd keep adjusting it one way and the other way, and either you're not cutting enough or you're cutting too much.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no happy medium.
There's no happy medium. Yeah.
Okay. So a couple other things that people had asked about. So one was around the frequency of honing, but the other was sort of what would be the expectation in terms of blade height adjustment after honing. And I think they're talking about the cutting angle after honing, but they use the term blade height adjustment. So I'm thinking that if you had it cranked at, say, 18 turns and then you honed the blade, could you then expect to back it off 3 turns? But I guess that's really sort of what the question's about. Is there some sense about what that would be, or is it really just You just have to back it off and then start cranking on slowly and surely until you're starting to get the cut you want.
Yeah, so 18 turns on his blade is a clip. So a clip, if this was somebody else's blade, then it might be way different. But it first of all depends how new your blade is. If your blade is new, it's long, right? So you have very little turns on it because the angle is less. If the blade is old and short, you got to crank it way harder because it needs to be steeper. So if you sharpen your blade instantly, just take at least 5-6 turns off all the time, no matter what, because you don't want to have a big dig in.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anything you wanted to add, Todd?
No, he pretty much covered it.
Okay. All right. So a couple other things. So one of the clubs was interested in knowing just how many blades should a 4-sheet club go through in a year. They're talking about 4 to 5 scrapes a week. So that's not even one a day. And they're talking about a normal curling season, 25 weeks, 20 weeks.
So I had a club, my last club I was on when I used to have curling clubs. I was a place called East St. Paul Curling Club. We had 6 sheets. We had 36 draws a week. And I could easily, like I would scrape sometimes, most of the time, twice a day. So with 36 draws a day, scraping twice a day, if you know how to sharpen a blade, I could easily get 5 to 6 weeks out of that blade. And that's with 36 draws a week.
How many blades should a club have?
No,
I mean, 2 seems to be at least, but for like a 4-sheet club, let's say.
I would have minimum 3, but if you have a 4-sheet club.
Okay.
You should have 1 on the machine, 1 spare, and 1 you send out to get sharpened.
That's right.
Okay. All right. And then as you get larger, then you need more.
That's right.
Okay. And then generally I guess that makes sense. I know somebody who sends theirs all at once in the summer to be done, and he has enough and lasts them all the year. So he might have 4 blades and he just has them all and sends them in the summer to be sharpened, and that carries him through the year. So, but you really need to have an extra blade so that you can send one to be sharpened, or if something dramatic happens, right?
That's right.
Yeah, because if any accident or an occurrence, which does happen, you're down to only having the 1 blade, and that can disappear. And then you have nothing.
All right. So people had asked about a couple different things that I think we've sort of covered. There are a couple questions here that are kind of go beyond what we're talking about in terms of blades. So I think maybe next step is, why don't we just open this up if anybody's got any questions off the top of their head. I've still got a couple items on my list to go through, but this might be a time, Dan, where we can see if there's anybody that's got anything else to talk about. There's a couple questions. One other question popped up from Santo. How can we tell how much crank on the blade is necessary? So I guess we're talking about, what is it? We've got the blade down. We're trying to figure out how much angle on the blade we need to put. And so what would you say about that?
So how much angle you put on your blade depends how much pebble you want to take off. So if you, it'd be different if you get your ice ready first. Let's say if you had finished flooding and now you're getting your ice ready, it's the start of the year if you're in a curling club, and you pebble, scrape, pebble, scrape, pebble, scrape to get your ice flat, right? Like we said before, you want to get your flood lines. So you want to be scraping fairly aggressive. You start off with, you want to take a lot of snow off using a big pebble head. So the amount of pressure you put on the blade depends how much pebble you're taking off and how much snow you want to have in front of your blade. So that's what determines, what you angle your blade at.
And so my experience was that there'd be 2 of us there. One of us would start running the machine and cutting. The other person was watching the blade, and as we would go along, we would change the angle on the blade depending on how much snow we thought we wanted to be taking off, just like you had said. So, and we might change it as we're going down the sheet and leave it that way for the rest of the scrape. Okay. We might change it again depending on how much we wanted to take off, but it did depend on how much snow we wanted to take off. And I think what we found is the higher the angle got, you'd be looking for a higher angle when, in point of fact, you were struggling with sharpness, and that wasn't really getting you more snow. It was just creating more problems because you were using sort of a semi-dull blade. But
that's very possible.
All right. So, so does anybody out there have any questions they want to ask? People know how to raise their hand on this? In case you need to know. If not, all right. A couple other things that people had asked about. So we had somebody put in what basically is the problem that they're having. So basically he says, you know, my blade was working great. The next day he comes back into the club and the left end shaves more than the right end. He put on a tensioner, but that left him with the center now cutting more than the ends. Left still cuts more than the right end. Checked all the bolts and they were tight. Put on a new blade just to test and had the same issues with the new blade. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I can tell you what happens. Like, blades are very finicky. They're like curling stones and they're really smart. Curling stones find 1,000th of an inch in your ice. If you have any low spot, the curling stone, he's a very intelligent guy. He'll find it. So over the years with making ice, and this is only because I have the opportunity to do a lot of different venues and whatnot, and you learn this by coincidence or mistakes. It depends. If your blade was absolutely perfect day one and it didn't cut more on one side, then wherever that gentleman or lady parked that blade, one side of that blade got warmer or colded or had air hit it, and it changed the blade. So sometimes you have to take aluminum foil or, you know, foil cover and put it over that blade so the temperature stays the same and one side doesn't get warmer than the other. Often when you store a blade not being used in between, that's what's going to happen. Like one side, even we've had over the years, like if one time, for instance, our blade was sitting behind scoreboards and the light hit it on one end and it didn't hit it on the other end, and we tried to go out to scrape between a briar, we couldn't use the blade. It was so bad that one side would just want to dig in and we couldn't figure out why. Well, we got another blade that was in the dark and it was absolutely perfect. And we had to put that other blade back into the dark and leave it and let it rest. And then we covered that blade the next day and there was zero problem. It stayed the same.
Not a problem. So he had a problem too with sort of putting a new blade on and thinking that the same thing was happening afterwards. And in my mind, I backed up to the tensioner. It was like, well, you put the tensioner on and the center now cuts more than the ends. So it seems to me you could loosen up the tensioner in some way, shape, or form. But it seems like the tensioner really is going to let both ends down. It's not going to be able to hold one end up more than the other. Or is there some way to use the tensioner where you can get a little bit more torque on one end of the blade versus another?
Well, there's my good friend Shorty Jenkins. He had invented a tensioner that you could tighten on both sides, and I believe Dave Merklinger still uses them for some of the events that he's done in the past few years. But I really never believed in those. If I had a blade that was you know, cutting a little bit more on one side, I would just hone it so it cuts the same. But a tensioner should be only there to, you know, to bring those sides up a little bit, very little, and keep it that way. It shouldn't be to do one side or the other. Like that's not what it's meant to do.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. That's definitely helpful. So a couple of questions about scraping patterns. So, and I don't want to get too deep into this, but somebody asked, should you always be using the same scraping pattern or should you rotate through patterns each day? Okay.
Okay, so this goes back to doing about 28 or 30 years of doing schools with the Canadian Curling Association, the World Curling Federation, and whatnot. Scraping is a funny thing. So that's why I was saying earlier, you know, you could try to make an ice maker out of somebody for, you know, for years, and they'll just never be an ice maker. And you get another person and he'll get it right away. So scraping patterns have to be used by watching the ice. So if your ice isn't flat, you can't scrape the same way the next day or another day, or you can't scrape this on Wednesday and this on Saturday and this on Tuesday, because if the guy in front of you pebbles different, your ice will take a different shape. So you have to scrape your ice by what the guy in front of you pebbles. So let's just say for the Olympics, the past 4 Olympics, I've had my friend Mark Callan from Scotland. He always pebbles for me and I scrape, but he's so good at it that I never have to change my scraping pattern. But although, you know, after a few pebbles, like maybe 3 days, we might have to throw in the one pass to take something out of the 8-foot piece. You can start to see something showing up on the blade. But if we've had people that in schools that pebbled 3 times and they ruined the ice completely because the people that scraped behind them didn't realize that the outside of the ice got so high that the rocks wouldn't curl out anymore. They would just curl in. So scraping patterns have to be alternated all the time. You always start scraping from inside out, never from outside in. You have to overlap on different places all the time. But the most important thing about scraping is that if you don't watch your ice, you have no idea where to scrape.
So another question that came was that this person had experience with going from one sheet to another sheet. They found that the blades seemed to be cutting more on some sheets than others. And they were wondering what that might be about.
Well, the ice is not flat. So if your ice, one sheet does something different than the other, your ice is not flat. It's out of whack.
Okay. And so that wouldn't be the blade in that case at all.
Absolutely not. And if he has any doubt, then he takes that blade, goes down the middle, turns around in the exact same position, on the exact same within the millimeter, and the same goes the opposite way. And if it shows that blade cuts more on one side or more in the middle or whatever, when he turns around and comes down the other way, he'll know 100% if it's the blade or the ice. And then if he still has in doubt, then he goes sideways on the sheet and does the exact same thing going sideways. Then he'll know exactly if the blade shows sideways going across the sheet, that it's good, but it doesn't show it going up and down the sheet, then you'll know you have something in your ice.
Okay. All right.
99% of the curling clubs have a W in their ice because people don't pebble correctly. They get more pebble in the 8-foots than they do anywhere else. So the 8-foots get high, so they get a W. So they get either a trough in the 8-foots or a hill in the 8-foot.
Okay. Hillary asked, should you always scrape the same direction, clockwise versus counterclockwise?
No, you change that every single scrape. So if you did your morning scrape clockwise, in the afternoon you go anti-clockwise.
So it's kind of like pebbling.
Exactly, always opposite. One's one way, one's the other way.
Okay.
And the only reason for that is if you pebble strong to one side, then you level that out if you go the opposite way. If you have a blade that cuts very slightly more on the one on the left or on the right, Every time you're going to go, it's going to level it out.
Hans, this is Gary White from Utica Curling Club.
Yep.
Pretty much 3 days a week, I'm at a 6-sheet club. I scrape down the 5 inner edges first to determine if there is a U or a W in the sheet by reading the blade. And then I'll go to, I'll do the sheets. But have you ever done that where you scrape the edges first to determine the levelness?
No, the only reason I would scrape edges is if I went and fixed somebody's eyes and the outside edges are really high, then what I would do, I would go around the outside, I pull the inside weight out. Yep. I pull the inside weight out and only leave the outside weight in and go around the outside about 2 or 3 times and cut the outside of the ice down and then pebble it. And then I put both weights in again and then start from scratch and level that sheet out.
Okay, yeah, well, we're, after 11 years of doing this, we're pretty level.
There you go.
I scrape those edges at least twice a week to determine the levelness of the sheet, and then I'll start scraping the sheets.
Yeah, so if it's working for you, don't change it.
Yeah, okay, all right, thanks.
I think that's one of the challenges for a lot of people is that if you haven't been doing it day in and day out or doing it for years to really get a feel for sort of what's the personality of your ice and how does it change shape over a short period of time or a long period of time, that you're kind of struggling as to what's the problems and how to fix them. But there's a couple other questions here people asked, and we'll see what else pops up that are somewhat related. And one person wanted to know sort of what were the patterns that you use, okay, sort of when you're doing Olympic ice and arena ice. And then how do you get the ice to curl without texturing the rocks?
So first of all, when you have to decide how much curl you want, do you want for the Olympics and whatnot, we have to sign an agreement. We actually have to sign a contract. I don't know if anybody knows that, but we do. We have to sign a contract with the World Curling Federation. The ice has to curl 4 to 5 feet, no more. The speed has to be in between 24 and 25 seconds, hog to tee. We have to sign a contract that our ice conditions have to be within that guideline. Okay. For the Olympics. So, and also for any world championship that we do, we have to sign that same guideline with the World Curling Federation. So for us to be able to do that, normally when we do an event, the rocks get papered on the start of the event. If you do it right, you should not have to do anything with those rocks again. As for scraping patterns, again, it really depends who pebbles, but a normal scraping pattern, if I get ice ready, like once it's finished flooding, I would do a 3-pass, I would do a 4-pass, then I would go back to a 3-pass, then I would do a 6-pass, then I would do a 5-pass, because a 5-pass shows you do a 3 straight and then a 2 over top. That will show you if you have anything in those 8-foots. And then you just repeat that and you overlap in different places. So like if I do a 4-pass, the first time I might overlap on the 3-hole. Well, the second time it's a 1-hole or a 1.5 hole. And the same on the outside on the 4-foot line. And I never end up in the same place. I start in the middle. I start on the 3-hole, then go to a 1-hole, and on the outside, the same thing. So if I go right against the boards, the first time, the next time I'll stay away about 4 inches from the boards or from the edge of the sheet, whatever you want to call it. So never will I do the same thing twice.
Okay. And it seems to me that one of the challenges of doing in arena ice is that you do have the bumpers there, which you don't have in a lot of clubs. So you don't have that flexibility of kind of going off the sides. Is that one of the challenges?
It's just actually the people that have no boards that have open ice, they get the same problems because it depends who pebbles. But what you can do, obviously, you can go down you know, the middle of each sheet and scrape that off every now and then, which you have to anyway. But a lot of clubs in Ontario don't have boards. It's really a Western thing. Like once you get into Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta, they all have boards. But then you get out into BC, a lot of them don't have them again. But in Ontario and Eastern Canada, a lot of them don't have boards. They just have open ice.
And the clubs I've curled in, some had boards, some didn't. One had boards. It was a 2-sheeter, but it had a sand base, and each of those sheets was sort of on a different level, and that's why they had to have the boards. Okay.
Yeah, and that's why in the old days they had boards, especially in Manitoba, because you know, in the very old curling rink where I started to make ice, by the spring, sheet 4 was about 5 inches higher than sheet 1 was, just exactly like you say. And if you didn't have boards, you could have never maintained the ice, because we used to have to flood every single weekend because it would be heaving so bad.
Okay. So a couple more questions that are still on this list. So one person was wondering about if you could make any comments about sort of the difference between dragging stones after nipping. So I know, like in the club I was in, we would nip the ice, and there were some people who would then run rocks, all right? And, you know, for them, it was just a different way to get the ice in a little more shape to play. I had mixed thoughts about it, but we all have opinions, not that there's science necessarily beyond a lot of our opinions. So, but what are you thinking about that question? You just hear about what your thoughts are on dragging stones after nipping. No.
Well, there is science and and non-science behind it, because, for instance, first of all, if your rocks are very aggressive, then you have to push them to get the aggressiveness off. That's one thing. But if you, for instance, when we were just in China for the test event about a month ago, when I came back for a wheelchair, we nipped the ice first, and then we dragged the rocks like 6 times to clean that ice up really, really good, so that they had 24-second ice, like right from the start. And if you would just nip the ice, they would never get that speed.
Okay. So basically, dragging the ice is one way to help speed up your ice.
That's correct.
Okay. So separate topic, different topic. So somebody was who's nipping their ice with their scraper and also has a nipper and has been comparing the snow weights, all right? And they're just trying to get some sense of, I think that they're not quite as even as they would like them to be, all right? In other words, that for whatever reason, they're not coming out sort of at the same amount on every sheet when you nip with a nipper versus the blade.
Well, I'm not sure if everybody knows how a nipper works. There is springs under those blades.
Yeah.
And they can be adjusted. But the pressure, you can never make it exactly the same as you can with a, scraping with a scraper. With a scraper, you adjust it to exactly what you want. So if you want to clip an ounce or 1.5 ounces or 2 ounces, you can adjust that like 100% with a blade, like with a scraper, but you cannot do that with a nipper.
And
it's impossible.
He was asking sort of about the adjustment thing. And it seems like with the springs in there, that makes it a bit of a challenge. That I'd
absolutely.
Go ahead.
No, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
And I'd actually had a conversation with a colleague in Ontario about this. And, his point was, well, with a nipper, you're picking up some of your snow is getting left in the mop. And also you can get some snow that's still stuck up in the housing that you might not be getting all the snow. Okay. So that might be, if you're coming up light, then that might explain that. If you're coming up heavy with your nipper, that's a different kind of thing. Then that's a different issue around adjusting. So, but it seems like it's just not practical to think that you can adjust a nipper blade to get it exactly close with what you're going to get with a scraper blade.
No, that's correct. But the nipper, has been a good tool for a regular curling club setting. You run that nipper around, bang, you're ready to roll. Most people don't have time to nip the ice with a scraper like in a regular curling draw. If you have 5 or 6 draws a day, like, we have in Winnipeg, like that's just not possible. So with a nipper, you just run around, you're done. So, unless you want to be really, really, really exact, you don't need to have the scraper to nip the ice.
And what do you think about sharpening nipper blades? Not that you're in necessarily that business, but this was part of his question, and it's something that also had come up that, we had had a discussion here about, should we do a video on taking your nipper blades off so that you can then sharpen them?
Well,
right?
Todd didn't answer that. We just did it.
Well, all I can tell you is that compared to what I'm used to, a nipper for club level is a different animal, as I'm used to a 60-inch one piece versus what can be a 3-blade or a 4-blade system. I really can't formulate much of an opinion other than it is perfect for clubs.
So we actually do nipper blades, and we did about 2 or 3 clubs, but they send them in with their blades, and we just take them apart and then put them back together the same way, and get the blade sharpened and put them back. So you can do it yourself, like you just take the blades out and take them somewhere and get them sharpened, but they do get dull, so you do have to sharpen nipper blades. There's no if, buts, or whatever.
No, they definitely get dull. I don't think most people think about it because they still usually cut and they're okay. So I don't think people are thinking about it. My friend was doing, he's in a 6-sheet club, and he has 3 sets of nipper blades. He goes through 2 a season, basically. He rotates them, but he always has an extra in case he needs it. And he sends his back to be sharpened at the manufacturer. All right. And, my conversation with him, and sort of as we talked about it, the question is, if you did them yourself, are you going to be able to get all 3 of those blades the same? Because you really want them all the same, right? When you stick them back in the nipper. If they're not identical, then you're going to get a different cut in different places. And so that was his thought, that he would send them back and have them done by the manufacturer or somebody like you guys.
Yeah, well, it's really not how they're sharpened. It's how they're put back together. Like the sharpening is very easy. The sharpening of blades is nothing. It's to get the springs and the tension and to put back together. So the sharpening of those blades, like you could do it, basically, if you had them cheap. But the thing is, it's nothing to sharpen them. It's to put them back together so that they're right and set the way they were, because there's shims in there. They shimmed them. So there's shims in there. So you gotta make sure that you put them back together the same way they were. So the sharpening of the blades is nothing. It's the putting it back together.
Okay, that's good. So we have 15 minutes left, what we said. So I want to ask you about China.
It exists.
And the reason I want, the reason I'm asked, I just have a couple of things I wanted you to just talk a little bit about. So one is, can you talk about who's going to be on your ice crew in China? So I know when we talked on the phone a couple of weeks ago, you had mentioned how someone dropped off and Sean Olson was going to come from USA. And so that's a good sign. So he's one. But who else is going to be on? We have some people from Canada that be on this call. And so I think people were just curious about who's on your ice crew in China.
Well, there's really normally only 2 or 3 paid people, which would be me, Mark Callan from Scotland, and Sean Olson. And Sean Olson got invited because Eric Monfort from Winnipeg, that's done the last 4 Olympics with me, his son-in-law, unfortunately, has cancer and is in really bad shape, and he's just a young gentleman with kids, and so he opted out, and obviously understandable. So Sean Olson worked with us in Pyeongchang at the Olympics, so we decided to to get him on our crew, and because he's, first of all, he's you know, he's a good guy. He's strong to lift the scraper around and those kind of things. And so that's what we need. So that's why he's there.
So it'll be you three plus a group of volunteers from China?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. And these are, so now, when I had met you probably 4 years ago, or 3.5 years ago anyways, okay, you were showing us pictures about what they were doing at that point in time to create ice in a swimming pool.
That's correct, yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that, just so you can give people a sense of what that process was like and when you started working on that project?
Yeah, so basically in 2019, we did a full test event already. The year before that, they already made one sheet ice and they put steel beams and covered this pool, and we had to go and see if it's actually even possible. But in 2019, when we did the full test, so it was the Olympic pool. It was called the Water Cube for the Summer Olympics, and it's now called the Ice Cube for the Winter Olympics, but only temporarily, because when it's done, that steel beams and the floor will come back out and be a pool again. But in Beijing, they tried to use some of the, you know, the summer facilities to host some of the winter events to cut the costs down. So this is one of the venues they're using to not to cost so much. But in hindsight, I think they would have been way better off just building a new building, and they would have had a lot less problems. Like you know, I can't go into all the details, but the floor itself and everything is 100% the ice system that we have. It's an ISS out of Germany, portable ice plant, which works really, really good. We used it for other world championships in buildings that were like a gym or a concert hall or some damn thing where we made ice in for a world championship. So from that standpoint, it's no problem. The problem we have is the building. Other than that, is not made for dehumidification and air conditioning to the point what we need with having no air going on the ice. And when we did our test event in 2019, and we couldn't go back for 2 years, when we were there in October, they have done nothing to rectify any of the problems that we had. And now we're in December, and I'm going back on January 12th, and they still have done nothing. And we really don't know what's going to happen when we get there. So it's quite a problem, really.
So that seems to be the challenge that faces a lot of these big events when they're going into different buildings. I remember being in Kingston for the Briar, and it was raining outside for 2 days, and they were playing with temperatures. Okay, I mean, I was in there, and my first draw was in the evening, and I was up at the top of the Kingston Arena, and it was hot. You didn't need a jacket. And then I came back the next morning, and I was up there, and I was freezing up there at 8 in the morning because they'd had the doors open all night or whatever they did to bring the temperature down as far as they could. So there's some real challenges in buildings like that. And there's sort of the same challenges. So I was in that club. Actually, we're in Mayfield, Ohio, in the end of September, and 4-sheet club, and we're doing a pre-Olympic trial, and Sean was there, and I don't know, we were in there 2.5 days, and at one point he started to notice that the air was coming out of one of the dehumidifiers seemed to be eating away at the ice, and I was kind of shocked how much effect it had over a short period of time. And then we changed it, and the next day it was totally different and still a problem, and we eventually got it to a point where we could make it work. But it really surprised me. I wasn't aware how much air really could affect ice without people necessarily, most average club guys, even noticing it, to be honest. So I can appreciate the challenge that you face going back there. So, but it just, it's been quite an adventure for a long time. I was surprised when I talked to you that you'd already started on it. And it just seemed like it's been an ongoing project for quite a while.
Yeah, it's not easy. People that think it's easy making ice, they're very wrong.
I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
So anybody else out there have any questions? Otherwise, I think we can wrap this up. So
this is Jeff Hannon from Nutmeg Huron Club.
Hi, Jeff.
We, for the last probably 10 years or 15 years actually, will grab blade from a lot of different clubs, Ardsley, Plainfield, us, Norfolk, and we ship the blades up to Canada to be sharpened. And I was just wondering, it's a huge expense, obviously. Shipping costs more than the sharpening cost. So I was just wondering if there's any place on the East Coast, at least, where we can get blades sharpened that we could trust. Thank you.
So, Jeff, I don't know the answer to that. So I know a couple of clubs that are sending theirs to Canada. And like I said, that the club I was at a couple of years ago, we were having ours done at somewhere in New England, but they were taking the blade off the bar. Now, somebody from another club, I think the Cape, emailed me and asked me about the same thing. So what we're going to do in a couple of days, I think, based on your question, is see if we can't survey as many, send out an email to all the GNC dedicated clubs, and we can get people to kind of fill out a Google form survey fairly quickly, and we'll find out where people are sending them, and we'll find out if there's somebody in New England that people are using it, and then we can share that with you all as soon as we get that information.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, this is Jeff again. Sorry. I'm familiar with Machine Blade, and I would never trust them with my blade. If you have a Zamboni, they're great. If you're scraping at a curling club, don't even bother, because I've talked to them multiple times on the phone when they tried to get me to use their service, and they couldn't answer any basic questions. So we bundle up our blades together so that when we send them up to Canada Curling Stone, and I'll mention them because they're close, they're great to work with. They do all the work. They do all the across the border forms that are needed. They split the shipping out and the billing out to all the different clubs. And no, it'd be great if I didn't have to do this for the last 15 years, but I don't see another choice. So thank you again. So
Hans, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to actually just mention that George Phillips from the US, he's probably brought about 65 blades here already. Oh, yeah. He does kind of a tour around, and he picks them up and brings them here, and we sharpen, and he comes and brings them back and takes them back to the clubs. But of course, he doesn't go all the way east. Obviously, it's a pretty long drive for him. But yeah, you have Canada Curling Stone over there, and you know, and I think what we're working on in the future here is one of the things I talked to the US people about is, and before they actually got rid of Rick at the USCA, when Dave Stagataff was still there, we were hoping to set something up, and we kind of knew that we were going to get into the blade business, and we were hoping to maybe find somebody in the US that we could train, and then send Todd down there and train somebody, and then just, you know, charge like $20 a blade or something for the training and the expertise, so that you guys in the US have somewhere where you can take your blades and don't have to ship them so far. So this is one of the things that we are working on. We're also working on that with Europe right now as well. And so this is hopefully one of the things that we can do once this COVID subsides a little bit. And this is definitely something we're working on.
And I know that I had heard about George Phillips the other day. I had a conversation with Kevin Masden, he's from Minnesota, but does the arena ice stuff for USA Curling. And he had mentioned George's name and said that George drives around with a truck picking up blades and runs them up to you guys, or runs them up to Ice Master. And it just, made things a bit easier out there. And I think we could find out some more information about that and see if that's something, Jeff, that there may be some way to make this a little less painful for you and the other clubs that are faced with this. So
even with that, George has had a lot of, I would mention Seattle, California, Arizona, all the way into Wisconsin. And if it's time and distance, it's easier and cheaper to ship things to Langdon, North Dakota to him to bring it across.
that's helpful, Todd. That's helpful. Okay. I'll, you know what, I'll get a hold of Kevin and see if we can't get a hold of George and have a conversation with him and see what he does and how that works. And then we can share that with the clubs, at least in the GNCC, or the ones that we know in the States here that are on these calls with us. So, and that I think will maybe help facilitate stuff for people somewhere down into the future. Who knows when, but.
Yeah, and he's a really good guy. You know, I mean, I've known George for 25 or 30 years, and he's so helpful with everything. You know, he offers to bring this, or can I do this for you guys, and whatever. Like, and he's a super guy.
No, that's exactly what I heard. So from Kevin. So I think that this will be helpful, and this has been a helpful conversation. So listen, I want to thank people who signed up and registered for tuning in. Dan, can you throw that slide up with the evaluations so that people can know where that's coming from?
I can, hold on.
Okay. So I just want to thank Todd and Hans for doing this. It's been really helpful information. I think I've learned a lot, and I'm sure other people have. And it's, I think it's it's critical. When we were talking about doing some trainings, we kept getting hung up with one of our folks talking about, well, it comes back to the blades. If you don't have the best blade, if you don't have a really good, accurate blade, you're going to be in trouble. So I really appreciate that both of you took time to be able to spend with us. So like any of the activities we do, any of our events, we actually send out training evaluations. So I hope you all will take a few minutes to fill out. It's a short evaluation. It basically will provide us with some feedback. All the feedback we got from people, both criticisms and compliments last year, were very helpful. We actually have a year-end report that's up on the webpage, on the GNCC webpage, on their ICE support project. So if anybody's interested in seeing what the evaluations were and who actually attended these trainings, you might want to look at that document. Sometime in the next couple of days, you're going to get an email from Pete Della Pella. It'll be at pdella52 from pdella52 at Hotmail. And so I just hope you'll take a few minutes to fill out the training evaluations and give us any of your feedback, because your feedback is what helps us improve. So thanks a lot again, Hans and Todd, for joining us. Thanks everybody for signing in, and I think we can sign off now.
Perfect.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, take care and stay safe.
Thank you.
You too.
There we go.